My name is Sik Ruoh Yih. I am from Center for the Promotion of Knowledge and Language Learning, University, Malaysia, Sabah. My paper title is Incorporating Chinese Traditional Culture in Primary School Chinese Textbook. This is Malaysia. Malaysia Chinese is about 22.6% of the Malaysian population. It's the second largest ethnic group in Malaysia. Malaysia and China share an inseparable bond. Malaysian Chinese are descendants of the first generation of immigrants who went down south to earn a living during the Han, Ming, and Qing dynasty. Malaysia was the first Asian member to establish diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China. On 31st May 1974, Malaysia signed a joint communique with the People's Republic of China. Chinese education in Malaysia. Zheng Liangshu said, "Where there are wells, there are Chinese people. Where there are Chinese people, there is Chinese education." Malaysia has the most comprehensive and systematic Chinese education in Southeast Asia aside from China, Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan. It's also the country that has preserved Chinese culture the best. Research background: the manifestation of Chinese culture in Malaysia. Due to the influence of local life, Malaysian Chinese have come to incorporate the culture of other ethnic groups into their own culture. Likewise, they have also influenced other ethnic groups with Chinese culture. The Malaysian education system, primary school, 7 to 12 years old. We have two types of national primary school in Malaysia. One is national type school and the other one is national primary school. National type school, we have national type school Chinese, SJKC, Chinese as a medium of instruction. The other one is national type school Tamil, Tamil as the medium of instruction. And for National Primary School Sekolah Kebangsaan SK, Bahasa Malaysia is the medium of instruction.
Chinese subject in National Primary School. In year 1957, Malaysia started offering Chinese subject to Chinese students, which known as pupils on language POL class, with at least 15 Chinese students in May start this POL class. In year 1996, Chinese subject is open to students of other ethnicity, but is still under extracurricular. That means students have to stay back after school for Chinese lesson. In year 2011, under the standard-based curricula for primary school KSSR, Chinese language is offered as an elective subject and is allocated 90 minutes per school week into the pupil's schedule.
This is the Chinese language textbook in National Primary School. Since 2011 until now, we have two versions of Chinese textbook that are printed. The first version is already printed from grade 1 until grade 6. And the second version is revised 2017 KSSR Semakan 2017 is only printed until grade 5. We are still looking forward for the grade 6 Chinese textbook to be printed in next year. Research problem. Cultural differences among ethnicity are always a sensitive issue. Education is the best way to teach pupils of the cultures of different ethnicities in Malaysia. If people are educated since an early age on different cultures, definitely misunderstanding between each other can be reduced and, of course, the relationship with each other will be closer. Research question. There are two research questions in this research, which are: number 1, what are the traditional Chinese cultural elements that chosen to be included in the Chinese textbook in National Primary School for both versions? Number 2, can the traditional Chinese cultural elements be included in the Chinese textbook in National Primary School for both versions becomes a medium for cultural communication or cultural dissemination? Research objective. The objectives of this research are: 1. To study the appropriateness of the traditional Chinese cultural elements that introduced in the Chinese textbook in National Primary School as for cultural dissemination. Number 2. To analyze the traditional Chinese cultural elements and to investigate the need to reinforce cultural content in the Chinese textbook in National Primary School. Significance of the research. Cultural elements that are included in the Chinese textbook in national primary school are very important because they can become a medium for cultural communication among ethnic and also cultural dissemination to others. It can see which traditional Chinese cultural elements are being the focus and important for developing a peaceful and harmonious country with all the pupils and peoples are united. Besides, comments and suggestions will be given to reinforce cultural content in National Primary School Chinese textbook. Literature Review and Introduction to Language and Culture. Language. Oxford Dictionary defines that language means the system of communication in speech and writing that is used by people of a particular country or area. Culture. According to Edward, culture is that complex whole that includes knowledge, beliefs, arts, moral, law, customs, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. Language and culture. Edward Sapir defined that language and culture are correlated. Concurrently, language and cultures also play an important role in education. The culture of a nation can be explained when one learns its language. An introduction to traditional Chinese culture. According to Pang 2003, traditional culture refers to the spirit of a people and its manifestation. They have been shaped by their history as well as the casting of their history, which then give life to their present and nurtures their future. Lee 2014 believed that the traditional Chinese culture has existed before the May 4th movement for thousands of years, shaped by the environment, economic structures, government systems, social frameworks, and ecologies of China itself, accumulated and inherited until today. Traditional Chinese culture still affects modern society. Wang 2006, according to him, traditional culture is the overall representation and compilations of a people's ideologies, conceptual notions, and value orientations. Studies on Chinese traditional culture in second language teaching materials. According to Zhou 2013, culture plays a significant role as it reinforces the customs and values of the Chinese people. Culture has the potential to shape the attitudes of its students towards the Chinese language and encourage enthusiasm towards Chinese culture. Wang 2009 believed that Chinese traditional culture in second language teaching material is to achieve cultural understanding, to gain a better understanding of traditional Chinese culture, and teaching Chinese as a foreign language uses culture to foster multicultural understanding. Studies on cultural elements found within Malaysian National Primary School Chinese teaching materials. According to Zhang 2020, after he analyzed the two sets of teaching materials, SJKC Chinese textbook and SK Chinese textbook, found out that the Chinese textbook in National Type School SJKC are more suitable for the Chinese pupils. According to Lin and Chu 2020, the Chinese language syllabus for National Primary School was heavily influenced by Chinese primary school and the cultural heritage. And Malaysian National Primary School Chinese textbook has incorporated multicultural contents to expose non-Chinese Malaysian to the joy of learning Chinese. Research gap. There are fewer studies in this teaching Chinese language as a second language in national primary school. Only have research in comparing the Chinese traditional culture element in the Chinese textbook of HJKC and the Chinese textbook SK, or just discussing the Chinese traditional culture element in the Chinese textbooks of SJKC. The KSSR already used the two versions of National Primary School Chinese textbook over this last decade. By studying these two versions of the textbook, this paper will discuss how Chinese culture is depicted in Malaysian National Primary School Chinese textbook to fill up the gap. Research methodology, textual analysis, integrated study done within and beyond Malaysia, collecting relevant materials, research reports, literatures, dissertation papers. Make use of Chinese culture elements found in the textbook, summarize, categorize, and analyze content about traditional Chinese culture's elements. An objective deduction will be made based on the inevitability, importance, and value of the promotion of traditional Chinese culture element. Chart statistic. Elements of traditional Chinese culture found in National Primary School Chinese textbook are listed out. The collected content is categorized, arranged, and analyzed, and will provide conclusive recommendation. Research, analysis, and finding. Categories and elaborated traditional Chinese culture. All the Chinese cultures were listed out and they categorized into 4 cultural elements, which are traditional Chinese festival, traditional Chinese folk games, traditional Chinese family appellations, and traditional Chinese food culture. Traditional Chinese festival, we have Chinese New Year, we have Dragon Boat Festival, we have this Mid-Autumn Festival, and we have this Winter Solstice. 冬至. Traditional Chinese folk game, we have this Chinese chess, we have this diabolo juggling, we have top spinning, and we also have this shuttlecock kicking. Traditional Chinese family apparitions. First, we talk about the father, mother, brothers, and sisters, and then we talk about the father side, the paternal grandparents and the maternal grandparents. Then we talk about the mother side's uncle and auntie, and we talk about the father side uncle, auntie, and also the cousin. The 4th elements will be the traditional Chinese food culture. All these food will be discussed in the Chinese textbook in the National Primary School. Now we look at Table 1, Traditional Chinese Culture Element in KSSR National Primary School Chinese Textbook, the first version. The first element is the traditional Chinese festival. We talk about the Chinese New Year, Mid-Autumn Festival, and the Dragon Boat Festival and Mid-Autumn Festival. Here we got a little bit discussion in this chapter, but just a little bit, not that detailed. And the second element is the traditional Chinese folk game. We talk about the Chinese chess, the bolo juggling, starter court kicking, and the top spinning. Also, is not that detailed discussed. The third element is the traditional Chinese family appellations. Grade 1, we talk about the families, or on families, fathers, mother, brothers, sisters. And grade 2, we talk about the paternal grandparents and the maternal grandparents. Grade 4, we talk about the father side's brothers, sisters, and also the cousin. And year 6, in the grade 6, we talk about the mother side, brothers, and mother's sisters. And the 4th element is the traditional Chinese food culture. We could talk about the festival food, like example Chinese New Year sticky rice, mooncake, and mandarin oranges, the glutinous rice bowl, tang yuan, the dumplings, and so on. Table 2 is the second version of Chinese textbook revised KSSR Semakan 2017. The element of traditional Chinese festival, we have discussion in Chinese New Year, Dragon Boat Festival, Mid-Autumn Festival, and as well as the Winter Solstice, which this Winter Solstice is not discussed in the first versions of Chinese textbook. Traditional Chinese folk game also, we have the discussion in shuttlecock kicking, top spinning, and playing chess. And in this second version, we don't discuss on diabolo juggling. Anyway, the other games are discussed more detailedly in this grade 5 chapter. Traditional Chinese family apparitions also been discussed more gradually. First, like grade 1, it discussed about the own family, father, mother, brother, and sister. Grade 2, talk about the grandparents from the paternal side and the maternal side. Grade 3, talk about the father's brothers and sisters. And grade 4, it talks about mothers, brothers, and mother sisters. In the traditional Chinese food culture, it's also discussed about the festival food that we have. It's like dumpling, mooncake, and also the glutinous rice bowl. And as well, it have a chapter that discuss on the Chinese food cultures that is in grade 5. Chart 1. Distribution of traditional Chinese culture element found in KSSR National Primary School Chinese textbook. This is the first version of Chinese textbook. We can see that the elements are not quite equivalent discussed in this textbook. The traditional Chinese folk game only have 7% discussed, and followed by the traditional Chinese festival is 23%, traditional Chinese family appellations is 31%, and traditional Chinese food culture is 39%. Okay, now we look at the chart 2. It's about the Semakan 2017 National Primary School Chinese textbook. You can see that the elements are distributed more equivalent in these versions. The traditional Chinese festival is 31%, and also the food cultures and as well as the family appellations. Only the traditional Chinese folk game is still remain the same 7%. Anyway, the games that discussed in this version are discussed more detail and more introduction on it. Discussion and summary. After compare and analyze the two versions of National Primary School Chinese textbook, found out that the Chinese traditional culture elements included are relevant and related to the local Chinese culture, which is very close to our daily life. By introducing these cultural elements can bring understanding to other races and also can build cultural communication among ethnic. Some cultural elements are suggested to add on. Example number 1, Chinese traditional story, legends, tales, historical elements. Number 2, Chinese traditional sport element like wushu. Number 3, Chinese traditional show element example like 24 festival drum, and the local Chinese element history and building in Malaysia. The popularity of the Chinese language to be learned and the importance of Chinese traditional cultural elements in national primary school. Number of learners of the Chinese language in the world is increasing. It's because of the China vigorous economic development. People's curiosity about its culture, its language, and its people, especially after the 2008 Beijing Olympics. A lot of people go over to China to study and for traveling. The Malaysian government is placing ever greater importance on the Chinese language. Chinese as a foreign language Malay teachers training program is introduced to Malay students to giving a chance for them to go over China to learn Chinese as a foreign language, and hopefully after that they can come back to Malaysia to teach Chinese as a foreign language. In year 2011, Chinese language was included in the KSSR syllabus as an elective subject. Malaysia is a multi-ethnic country. That's why Malaysian education curricula are included teaching about the traditional culture, costume, and festival of its various ethnic groups since young. From the time they are young, conflicts between different ethnic groups can be prevented. Malaysians will instead be more united and have fewer misunderstandings due to differences. In this way, harmony will be strengthened. Thank you. 谢谢。